Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's event to launch and celebrate our Getting to Fair strategy. My name is Kate Simons and I'm the chairperson of the Essential Services Commission. To start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm hosting this event on. For me, that's the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands you are on today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. Just some housekeeping to begin. We are recording today's launch to share online for those who couldn't be with us today. For that reason, we'll be keeping everyone except the speakers on mute just to minimise any background noise. And today's event is a little bit different than our usual events, where we would normally welcome and indeed encourage questions and dialogue. Today we're here to present the culmination of 18 months of hard work, and we've got some fantastic speakers to hear from as well. If you do have any questions for the team, however, please feel free to reach out via the email in the chat bar. Someone's just going to put that in the chat bar in a minute, I think, and they will get back to you as soon as possible. Now for some introductions and a quick overview of the agenda. Today we are releasing our Getting to Fair, our strategy for breaking down the barriers consumers face when accessing and engaging with the essential services we regulate and administer. It's a 3-year roadmap to improve the experience of consumers experiencing vulnerability. It's the culmination of an intense 18-month program working with Victorians from across the state, as well as experts in consumer advocacy and community services and with the sectors we regulate. But as I outline in my foreword to the document, this strategy represents the latest step in a journey the Commission has been on for more than 5 years. It's a journey which represents a shift in mindset to treating customers as real people with complex needs and circumstances, not passive one-dimensional recipients of essential services. Today, I'm really pleased we have the Minister responsible for the Commission, Assistant Treasurer Danny Pearson, to say a few words. We also have a very special guest speaker, Sue Fraser from United Kildonan, who has a deep understanding of vulnerability and how it can affect anyone at any time. And we have Commissioner Simon Corden, who has stewarded this project with great energy and passion. Also with us today are my fellow Commissioners Rebecca Billings and Sitesh Bhojani, as well as the Executive Director of Price Monitoring and Regulation, Marcus Crudden, who was the executive sponsor of the project. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, with more than 280 people registering, representing a wide spectrum from the sectors we regulate to consumer advocates and community organisations, from government departments and other regulators. And also a very warm welcome today to some of the very special Victorians who are part of our community panel. Their contribution over a series of weekends during the second lockdown last year was so valuable to the development of this strategy, and I hope they're really proud of what we've done with their input, their reflections and their recommendations. I'd now like to hand over to the Minister responsible for the Commission, Assistant Treasurer Danny Pearson, who has some reflections on the strategy and the changing role of regulators. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks everyone for today. I'm beaming at you live from my son's bedroom underneath his bunk bed, so I apologise for the visual pollution behind me. But look, firstly, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. I myself would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations on whose land I'm currently on. I'd like to acknowledge all the traditional owners of the lands on which other participants may be dialing in from. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Well, today is a great day for our most vulnerable Victorians. The Essential Services Commission, in an Australian first initiative, is launching its Getting to Fair strategy, which has been designed to address consumer vulnerability in accessing essential services. There's an old adage, the greatness of a nation can be judged by how it treats its weakest member. And I believe that this strategy makes one more important step to making our state greater by supporting our most vulnerable in their time of need. Indeed, equitable access to some of the most basic necessities of life, like water or electricity, are the kinds of projects of intrinsic merit that our government stands for. And every step of the way in developing this strategy, the Commission has consulted with the community, with deliberative engagement provided through the community panel who are joining us today, as well as consumer advocates and community help organisations, I feel assured that the Commission has captured the social fabric of Victoria. Collaboration like this is so important. Sometimes we get lost in a whirlpool of our day-to-day, but we have to remember we are ultimately all here to serve the community, to help provide them with some of their most basic needs. Now, regarding the strategy, this 3-year roadmap is aiming to help those experiencing exclusion. It will achieve this by improving the way in which our regulated sectors engage with consumers experiencing vulnerability. The strategy has pinpointed 3 key objectives that will help break down barriers to accessing essential services. Firstly, that consumers experiencing vulnerability should be better supported to understand and exercise their rights and to have more influence on the Commission's work. Secondly, that services the Commission regulates should be more responsive, inclusive, and accessible to all members of the community. And finally, that the Commission be more responsive, inclusive, and accessible as an organisation. And these objectives have sparked many important improvements that have included pursuing more appropriate, consistent, and accessible communication for all consumers, centred on universal and inclusive engagement. Identifying vulnerable consumers early and empowering them to seek support. Ensuring that the support these vulnerable consumers receive is consistent, appropriate, and flexible. And that First Nations customers should receive better, more targeted and culturally appropriate support and engagement to reduce disconnection rates. Now, by implementing this strategy, it is my hope that the Commission will ensure that all consumers, regardless of their circumstances, have a more equitable access to the essential services in which the Commission regulates and administers. This kind of innovative thinking really positions the Essential Services Commission as one of Australia's premier regulators. We need more thinking like this to make sure vulnerable people don't fall through the gaps. And it's my hope that over time, those harmful and exacerbating barriers to access will begin to fade away through continued initiatives like this. And just finally, can I thank all the staff at the ESC who have contributed to this vitally important piece of work, and to particularly thank the community panel, the expert stakeholder reference group, and other engaged organisations for all their time and effort that they have put in. I hope this approach becomes a beacon for regulators across Australia, and I commend the Commission for its initiative and foresight in producing this piece of work. I have faith that this is not the end of the Commission's focus on vulnerable Victorians, but instead, rather, just the beginning. Thanks very much, Kate.
Great. Thanks very much, Minister Pearson, for those words and the support. I know there's many calls on your time at the moment. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend some of that with us today. So onward as we go, and yes, looking forward to the further work that's ahead of us. So thank you for your time today. Now I'd like to turn to the purpose of the strategy and say a few more words. So today we release Getting to Fair, our strategy for breaking down the barriers consumers face accessing essential services. As I said before, this is the latest step in our journey, which essentially started with the hardship inquiry in 2015 to 2016, a journey where we have come to a greater realisation that vulnerability is not something you are. Vulnerability can happen to anyone at any time. Understanding what this means for a regulator of essential services was at the core of this work, and understanding how people's experiences of essential services are shaped by circumstances often beyond the control of the individual. And understanding why what we do as a regulator in our decisions and determinations, in the rules we make and the way we work with essential businesses can help or hinder access to services for those experiencing vulnerability. So we developed Getting to Fair to better understand the nature of vulnerability. And what we learned is that vulnerability is multifaceted and complex. It's certainly not static. It may be temporary or permanent. It may be due to an event such as job loss, a pandemic, or personal circumstances. It may be due to systemic factors like employment insecurity, lack of access due to distance, a language barrier, or lack of digital literacy. Or it may be due to features of the market, for example, where information is too complex or products and services aren't designed with everyone in mind. And as I said before, while we've been on a journey for some time to put the experience of consumers at the heart of our decision making, we formally commenced work on Getting to Fair in early 2020. The project was identified as a priority at our annual Executive Commissioners Strategy Day in late December 2019. And that discussion noted that while we'd implemented reforms to better protect consumers experiencing vulnerability in making family violence provisions in our rules for energy and water, and introducing the payment difficulties framework in energy, we didn't have a way to track or report on the impact of these or similar reforms. So we had a consumer-shaped gap in our regulatory toolkit. The importance of protecting vulnerable consumers was then reinforced just a couple of weeks later when Victoria experienced what's been described as the worst bushfires in our history. Sadly, as you'll recall, those 2019 to 20 fires cost 5 Victorians their life. It destroyed 300 homes and burnt out 1.2 million hectares of land across our state's national parks and nature reserves. We'll certainly never forget the vision on the nightly news of thousands of residents and holidaymakers being evacuated by boat from the beaches of Malakuta. So we started 2020 knowing once again significant resources from the state and local government, from business and community and support agencies would need to go into bushfire recovery. And then, as we know, the coronavirus pandemic hit. In April last year, as the pandemic took hold of our nation, we as a commission held an urgent roundtable with the community health sector. We really wanted to hear directly from those on the ground about how the virus was affecting consumers for essential services. They told us at the time we were in a calm before the storm. The calls for help had fallen due to government income support, but they also told us they were worried there was a tsunami of harm coming if more wasn't done to support those who were facing payment difficulties. So at our second roundtable, we were warned about looming energy disconnections and the emergence of customers who were newly vulnerable, so people facing unemployment or underemployment for the first time in their lives. This was from hospitality workers to university tutors, from migrant fruit pickers to consultants. All were in the same boat, regardless of their prior income or education. And at the same time, those who were already experiencing vulnerability were even more isolated, more exposed than ever before. So as the year rolled on, we released an approach paper setting out a plan to engage with various communities, to conduct research and to build our internal capability at the same time. But we really wanted a strategy informed by real Victorians, people with a variety of experiences and insight into the question at the heart of our strategy: how do you get to fair? So we ran the Commission's first external deliberative process with a panel of 37 Victorians from a variety of backgrounds. And they met, and our role was to listen, and then we listened some more. And we heard that while anyone may perceive the barriers to accessing essential services, for those experiencing vulnerability, the barriers appear often bigger and more daunting. We heard that the barriers tend to be cumulative, repeated across multiple services, and that this compounds the stress and the harm. And at the end of that process, we took the panel's recommendations and we held workshops with staff and the sectors we regulate to turn their ideas into actions. And on that note, can I now introduce you to Getting to Fair, breaking down the barriers to essential services. Thanks very much, Alex. We identified consumer vulnerability as a key priority back in December 2019. Identifying that priority could not have been better timed. As we now know, a few weeks later, Victoria experienced devastating bushfires, and then the pandemic emerged, making this work even more important. The goal of this strategy is to break down barriers so that we make sure consumers experiencing vulnerability are supported in the way they access essential services. To be an effective and responsive regulator, we need to ensure the voices of consumers are better reflected in our work. It will also involve us playing an active role in building relationships and bringing stakeholders and decision makers together to help address issues faced by consumers. Getting to Fair is part of an overall strategic shift we are making in our role as a regulator, ensuring we include the experiences of all consumers across the sectors we regulate. And increasingly, there is a recognition that businesses and regulators have a critical role to play to improve consumer access to essential services. Getting to Fair was always focused on breaking down the barriers consumers can face when navigating our sectors. We completed months of research and engagement on the experience of vulnerability before releasing our draft. The draft contained 8 key reflections on the markets we regulate, which we've now simplified into 3 objectives for the final strategy.
What struck me as we developed Getting to Fair was the level of enthusiasm and the sense that we can do more and do better. This came from the businesses we oversee, from individuals on our community panel who came from right across Victoria and from very diverse sets of experiences, from the community representatives and organisations, and from our government partners, and also from within the Commission. A moment that really hit me was when one of the blokes in an internal workshop at the Commission teared up as he described his early life in public housing and how he thought we could do so much more to support people in difficult circumstances in the future, working with our partners. The businesses we oversee provide services that are essential to so many Victorians, whether it's energy or water or taxi fares or energy saving devices, or even those services that are funded by local government rates. We believe that by working closely and cooperatively with businesses, consumer groups, the Energy and Water Ombudsman, our partners across government, we can make support easier to access.
The Getting to Fair strategy is a new step for us as a Commission across all the sectors we regulate. It will involve us working with consumers, working with regulated businesses, and also working on ourselves. It will make sure we are looking after the interests of Victorians now and into the future. Thanks very much, Alex, for the video. And when I said back at the launch of this program that we would be conducting that deliberative engagement with consumers, I'm not sure I realised how key that process would be and how valuable that direct engagement with consumers would be. I remember when Simon and I welcomed the 37 Victorians from all walks of life to their first session, facilitated by Nicola and Desley, I provided some opening remarks that touched on some of my personal perspective and experiences. And what occurred to me at the time was what an amazing opportunity it was to hear directly from Victorians. And how remarkable it was that those 37 individuals were prepared to give us their time, share their experiences, provide us with a pathway and their insight into what really matters and what would make a difference. I was so grateful for their time and effort. And isn't this what this is all about? It's not just about applications for higher rate caps we assess for local councils, the tariffs we set for the Victorian default offer, the price determinations we make for a water business, the rules around disconnection of electricity or gas, or the maximum taxi fares we may set. This was about putting a face and giving a voice to the people who use those essential services every day. It really brought home what an important and privileged role we have to support and ensure accessibility and fairness for the community. That was such an incredibly powerful moment, not just for me personally, but for my fellow commissioners and the Commission team on our journey to hear directly from the community and to really understand the experiences and perspectives of real Victorians. I won't hesitate to say that I think that experience will undoubtedly be one of the key highlights in my term as chairperson. On that note, I'm now really pleased to hand over to today's keynote speaker, Sue Fraser. Welcome, Sue. Sue is from Kildonan Uniting Care and has more than 30 years' experience in the welfare sector across Victoria and Australia, and is a passionate advocate for addressing consumer vulnerability. Sue was awarded an Order of Australia Medal in this year's Queen's Birthday Honours for her contribution to financial counselling over many years. Among other commendations, Sue was recognised for the most prestigious award granted by Financial Counselling Australia, the Jan Bentman Prize. The prize recognises achievement in financial counselling or consumer advocacy with a focus on casework and campaigning for broader change. Like me, many of you might have seen Sue's TED Talk on consumer vulnerability. What really stood out for me was the moment, Sue, when you asked what happens when a consumer faces unexpected barriers or events. For me, that question really opened up my understanding of vulnerability and confirmed the need for us to better understand the nature of vulnerability. And haven't we learnt that lesson well over the past year? I first met Sue almost 5 years ago in the first few months when I joined the Commission. It was a meeting and discussion that stuck well and truly in my mind. At the time, we were developing family violence assistance provisions in the water sector. And Sue, you had so many valuable insights to help us more fully understand the experience of Victorians who had experienced family violence, and really gave real meaning to how we might approach the task set to us at the Commission by the Royal Commission. So on that note, today I'm really excited to hear more from you, Sue, on how we can do better for anyone who has or will experience vulnerability as they seek to access the essential services we regulate. Thanks very much, Sue.
Thank you. It's all a bit daunting to be thinking about and talking to a lot of peers, but I'll do my best. It's great to hear of the developments that are going on and that the profile of consumers has really risen as a source of truth. And for the work that we do at Uniting, we can't exist without consumer feedback and knowing that we're on the right trail. So my question to you is around hands up, who's vulnerable? I'm hoping most of you will put your hand up because actually you all are. And one of the things that COVID's done is actually normalise vulnerability in as much as we've all shared a risk. And I think when we think about vulnerability as a separate group of people, that's actually a fundamental error. I think we need to think about it as someone that through life will be impacted differently at different ages and stages and times in their life. In the past, when we talked about vulnerability, energy, particularly in vulnerability, I first heard the term fuel poverty, which was in 1983. It just tells you how old I am, really. And at the time it came around, John Cain was having a party platform promise to come into government to do something about fuel poverty. And he was elected, and then no one knew what the heck it meant, let alone had a program ready to go to address the needs. So I actually was employed in that program to help people understand energy and worked in that program for, I think, about 9 years. One of the best roles I've ever had, because I had the privilege of going into people's homes and talking to them about what it is they could realistically afford and what they understood about energy and giving them options and some thoughts around what they could do. I didn't need to be an encyclopedia around energy. What I needed to do was to be able to explain it in a way that other people could understand it. And at the time, I don't think I realised what a profound privilege that was, but it certainly was. I've always struggled in the energy sector with it being the consumer's responsibility to identify that they're the ones at risk or they're the ones who are struggling, rather than the business who has a range of tools to be able to identify people who are in difficult circumstances. And I'll come back to that in a while. When someone does ring a business, it doesn't roll off the tongue when they say, I'm in hardship or I'm vulnerable. What they're likely to say is, I'm in a spot of bother, or things are a bit tough at the moment, or I'll try and do that. Because what I know from my work is when they say I'll try really means that they know that they can't, but no one's listening. You know, I imagine when we get to getting to fair, that it means that all consumers will get what they need when they need it in a way that they can understand it. When I left energy, at that stage, I actually went into financial counselling and very quickly learned that it didn't matter how good we were, we would never meet the need of people who were struggling. So we had to think about things and do them differently. I had a lot of interactions with a lot of businesses, and I've been described as quite a fierce advocate. I know that would surprise some people, but at the time, the injustice of what was going on was so obvious, I couldn't understand why people couldn't see it and remedy it. And I'd had a lot of work to do with the Yarra Valley Water at one stage at the beginning of this work. And their CEO at the time invited me in to look at the business and give some recommendations. And he was frustrated that I was always being critical, but not providing resolutions. And at the time, I didn't know what the resolutions were. So we did go in and do that work, but that resulted in the first hardship program. And it still stands today in terms of both its integrity, although it's been advanced and improved over the time. It's around bringing back the principles of demonstrating respect to consumers, to have an acceptance of their truth, to put an arrangement in place that suits their needs based on what it is they could realistically afford. Not what they use, because often what they use doesn't equate to what they can realistically afford. In the work I did for years visiting people in their homes, it would be fair to say that I probably put on 8 or 9 kilos. But from people's generosity, you'd turn up to visit them, to talk with them, and they'd have baked something or made some scones or had slices available. And we're talking about people who had very little, but they were still generous and wanted to share and were thrilled to have someone come and talk to them about something that was so important to them. In those early days, I developed a program that looked at both energy efficiency and financial stability, because I actually think they go together. And what I know from the early part of that work, when we looked at 1,000 cases, that the average savings per household was 1,126 kilowatts a year. I don't know what that would be in today's money, but a substantial change for people who were struggling with their debt by providing information in a way that they can understand. In financial counselling, again, I was saying the same, different faces, but same issues. People couldn't navigate service systems. They couldn't ring their retailer or their bank and talk about their circumstance, be believed, and get the outcome that they needed. And at that point, they would often come to financial counsellors. So people would turn up with boxes of unopened envelopes, and you'd say to them, "Oh, what are these?" And they'd say, "Oh, they're all the bills." And they didn't open them because they'd often spoken to the business many times to try and resolve the issue and got nowhere, and they knew that they didn't have the money to pay it. Always really difficult. In my role now, I work with a team who do training and consulting nationally and sometimes internationally, working with businesses to understand vulnerability and to understand working with people in difficult circumstances. So it might be mental health or addictions or elder abuse, all sorts of different things. But the most important element of all of that work is how to be respectful, how to talk to someone and not diminish them through that process, regardless of their circumstances. A really important element. We work across all industries, and we are in a privileged place that we look into a lot of industries and a lot of better practice, because there's no such thing as best practice, and can see where there's been really successful outcomes or worked with businesses to achieve successful outcomes. It's fascinating. When I was a kid, Dad had a saying that I'd rather be had than be hard. And it's something that I often think about in the work I've done, because if you spend your time thinking about working with people who might be careless with the truth, is how I might describe it, you miss those who are being honest with you. And you don't design systems to catch 0.001% of the population. That makes no financial sense at all. When I talk to consumers, and we talk to them on a weekly basis as an organisation, in our team we do a lot of deliberative processes with consumers, a lot of focus groups, to find out what their experience is of an issue and what it is that they think should be different. And we often invite consumers, to participate in the training we deliver. And a few years ago, we put together a small video that I'd like to show you now. Don't turn your screens off. It is meant to be as it appears, and I'll chat with you when it's over. Thanks, Alex.
And it just
Look, I think I
brings the
pretended
worst
I was
out
okay at about 4 or 5 months.
You know, things like being afraid to go out because you don't know if you're going to have another heart attack. Being frightened to be alone because if something happened, what do you do? You know, things that were quite outside my thought process before became what I lived.
Eventually, what had happened, he went to hit me and he missed me, and I was holding my daughter and his fist actually went through the linen cupboard door, and that was when I said I'd had enough, that I didn't think about how I was going to survive, I didn't think about the money, I just...
And, you know, you get frustrated and you lash out, you know, you get abusive, you hang up, you know, and you get all these thoughts go through your head, you know.
I was down, you know, I had nowhere to go, I didn't have a home, so it's so hard to go up against 20 other people that's going for the same property, being Indigenous. When they seen us, it was sort of, oh, are they going to be able to pay?
Well, we had 5 children. One was quite sick. And we just never made enough money to make ends meet. My wife couldn't work because she had the kids were all young.
And done very well over time in relation to money. But I had a pile of envelopes about this high sitting on this table, of envelopes that I knew were bills and statements that I couldn't even bring myself to look at or think about.
Electricity, fines, I just didn't open. Didn't want to think about them, so I just shoved them in the drawer.
And I'd stick them in the drawer. It just got so bad.
Close the drawer, and it's like when I closed the drawer, they just didn't exist.
Then I felt like I was managing okay.
I understand that some of them are only doing their job at home. Some of them are going to
But this was the final straw. What changed it for me is really quite simple. Something that could have been done a long time before was somebody to listen.
Rung back about a week later and I got a completely different person. And, you know, said, well, you know, what can you afford to pay? You know, so she actually clearly explained what was available and calmed me down a lot. You know, took away a lot of my frustrations and anger and angst.
You know, she really listened and she was very cultural. She listened to, you know, and sort of had an understanding about our culture.
When people listen to you, it's easier to deal with debt collectors and that sort of thing because you know they understand. It's the understanding you need.
To leave the judgments out of it and to listen to people and to believe them. And most people don't tell porkies, and they are doing the best they can, and as soon as they get back on their feet, they'll sort it.
Sometimes listening is all it takes.
To make a difference.
In someone else's life.
Thank you for listening to my story.
Sounds easy, doesn't it? And it is, actually. As you were hearing what people were saying, you would have seen words coming across the screen. That's what people in call centres were thinking about what someone was saying. You know, why doesn't she leave? We're all in the same boat. So as long as we have a negative approach to people's circumstances and we can't really hear what's going on, it will always be a barrier. It comes down to training and leadership from the top in any organisation around what a minimum expectation is. You know, I sometimes hear in businesses, they say, oh, I understand. And I think rubbish, you do. All of our experiences are unique, and they're all determined by what's happened to us, how we were raised, the opportunities we've had, the education we've been given. It's all individual. I sometimes still hear in the energy world that customers are categorised into can't and won't pays. It's rubbish. If people could pay, they would. So we need to think about it differently. I've probably worked with 10,000 individuals over my working life, both in energy going into their home and then in financial counselling. And when I talk to them about what's going on for them, there are barriers to payment or barriers to participation. We need to think about what that means and how it works. You know, I sometimes hear about delinquent accounts, and I think about teenagers, which of course is totally off beam. They're unpaid accounts. They're not delinquents. You know, I hear that disconnection notices are still referred to as a form of communication to get consumers to then contact a business. And again, when I hear that, I think, what's wrong with your comms strategy? Why hasn't all of your other interventions worked? Because they can. If you approach people with respect and dignity, they will respond. What I do know, though, is that when consumers have been given endless notices and they finally come up with the money, there's then a belief that, oh, see, they always had the money, they just chose not to pay. Where anyone from the community sector well knows is that the money's been borrowed from someone, or it's come from a community agency, or something's been pawned or sold, or they've gone to a payday lender, which in fact then puts people at further disadvantage next time. Alex, can we have the caring slides, please? Caring is a program that Uniting run that, oh, I've got a phone ringing in the background, I'll just ignore it. Caring is a program that's an integrated service model where Uniting has several partners in business that we do training and consulting with, who are often invited to participate in caring. So out of 1,600 people who came to say, these are the vulnerabilities that were faced. I don't know if people can actually read those. Can someone give me an indicator? Yeah. So of the 1,600, 806 were facing unemployment, 318 family violence, accident or severe illness, 291, mental health issues, 184, divorce and separation, 136, limited English proficiency, 125, homelessness, 93, intellectual or physical disability, 85, just being elderly, or death. So when we work with consumers, they might not just have one contributing factor. It could be a complexity of issues. Alex, the next one, please. So when we ask them about the causes of financial difficulty, insufficient income or poverty. Now, I think that's really interesting because most people who are particularly poor or have had it tough could teach me how to manage money. It's not that they spend irresponsibly, it's they don't have enough to meet their daily needs. And of that 1,600, 763, the cause of the financial difficulty was utility bills. Personal and family problems, and you can read the rest: job loss, credit card, mortgage arrears, rates arrears, rental arrears, and business failure. And again, there will be a complexity of issues. It's not uncommon to say someone with arrears in their accommodation, as well as utility debt, as well as relationship issues. So people have a lot to deal with it at any one time, and often energy or water or gas is not the highest priority. And rightly so. When I was thinking about this, I contacted our energy workers. We've got an energy team, a program that I designed about 20 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, that still exists, and some energy retailers partner with us to deliver programs. But what we tend to see across those positions are people are on the wrong plans and the wrong tariff, that their payment plans are unaffordable, that there's high debt level. You know, their energy literacy knowledge is very low, that the utility relief grant is underused. There's little trust in retailers, and there's particular issues around asylum seekers not being given support. So when I talk to financial counsellors about their client base, and we have 23 financial counsellors across Victoria with Uniting, the first things they were saying is arrangements were that people couldn't afford them and they were unable to get the support they need, and the debts were too high. So very similar, that people were on the wrong tariff. You know, people had tried several times to resolve their issue. You know, there was an underuse of ergs. And delays in getting through came up a few times, where someone could be on the phone for an hour and a half trying to get on a better tariff, trying to get a proper payment arrangement, you know, whether they'd be put through to the special assistance team or hardship team, as they call it. I would call this an opportunity-rich environment where there's so much that could be done if that was the desire. And I think that it is. There was mention earlier of my TED talk that I did a few years ago. And I did that for the purpose around talking about vulnerability and turning vulnerability into a strength. The thing is with that is the strength is knowing that you're vulnerable. And in that talk, I talked about a 6-week period in my life, which was just horrendous. And probably 5 or 6 significant issues occurred. That were a couple of deaths, an illness, well, heart event they call them now, rather than a heart attack, a relationship, and then a physical illness on top of that. But people don't often talk about what vulnerability feels like. So I gave that some thought, and the thing that was important to me to share today was that vulnerability is uncomfortable and it's difficult to talk about. You know, I couldn't comprehend information. I couldn't make a decision. I couldn't think, which sounds a bit odd. You know, I couldn't commit to payments. I didn't know what money I had or where it was. And I was quite emotional, and I think some might describe as irrational. That was probably true. But the truth of it is I was simply overwhelmed. And when someone is overwhelmed, asking them when they're going to make their next payment is just nonsensical, or how much they're going to pay. It took me probably 6 months, 7 months to get back on track and to be back at work and functioning and in control of all aspects of my life. I was surprised by that. One of the things that really impacted was my memory. And it's still not as good as it was now as it was then. And at one stage I went to my heart specialist and said, just give me something for my memory. This is ridiculous. $500 a visit. And his words of advice were, Sue, until your heart mends, your memory won't. That was it. I'm happy to share that so that everyone else doesn't have to go and pay that sort of money. We can't expect our mind and our bodies to be in line when there's different traumas going on at all times. And we all experience things differently, as I spoke about. So when I think about what does getting to fair look like, It's around people being able to access the information they need in a way that they can understand and that they can then action. And again, it sounds simple, but our source of truth is consumers. And it's the willingness of all of us to work together in a collaborative fashion that's going to make the difference for the outcome. You know, with so many agencies involved, so many consumers involved, it is fantastic. I'm really optimistic. I'd love to see all this come together before I retire. Because then I could actually walk away from it knowing that if someone rings a business and says, I'm in a bit of strife, or I don't know if I can do that, that they don't have to come to an advocate to get a fair outcome. That will tell me we've been successful. So I'll finish on that note. I am optimistic. And I really look forward to hearing what happens next. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Hearing from people like yourself, people with real insight into the experience of vulnerability, it's been such an integral part of this project. And thank you for being, for agreeing to be part of today's launch. I was particularly struck by your phrase that it's an opportunity-rich environment, and I think we certainly passionately believe that's the case. So can we have a virtual clap for Sue? I think that was a fantastic presentation. As the lead commissioner on this project, I personally have been blown away by how much support and enthusiasm we've had from so many different quarters. From the businesses we oversee, from the consumer advocates and community health organisations, as Kate mentioned, the community panel, some of whom are with us today, from other regulators and from across government. So of course, we wanted today to reflect that input. We also knew we couldn't put up a parade of different speakers to represent all the many groups in the time we have. So we decided to put together a quick video so we could bring a variety of observations from just some of the people who've been involved in this work. Thanks, team.
Humans don't exist in a silo, and neither do the issues that impact us. So when we talk about vulnerability, yes, there's financial vulnerability, but there's such a multitude of factors that are playing into that as well. You know, we might have mental health, we might have family violence, we might have had a baby, we might be sick, someone we know might be sick. You know, we are a complex being, and the complexities that exist for us exist outside of just financial.
I think as regulators, it can be easy sometimes to just start thinking about issues and problems and markets, but of course the whole reason we exist in the end actually comes back to the community and people. And in my view, to do our job well, it's really critical that we're actually thinking about people as human beings in all of their differences and complexity.
We all are different, we all have different experiences, and we all have different things happening to us. That means that we're not going to necessarily react in the way regulators or businesses might expect. And that's really what I think is the most important by bringing, consumer vulnerability as a core. It's really recognising us as people.
What I'd like to see is we're moving from that conversation, it gets a conversation started, but we're moving into action that actually directly impacts how people engage with the various essential service providers that they do in a way that reflects their unique circumstances, and they're treated in a way that's fair and reasonable for them.
My simple hope for the strategy is that we end up doing better for those customers who are experiencing vulnerability. It's got to be a pathway where we make some improvements, we can then step back and reflect and refocus on where we go next.
It's an opportunity to bring the concept of vulnerability to the core of the regulator's approach and decision making, whether that's looking at pricing, looking at access to a particular services, looking at some of its compliance and enforcement methods. It is considering customer vulnerability as a starting point, and it's not an add-on. It's sort of core to the work that's done.
By coming together, sharing what we know, sharing best practice, learning from each other, we actually collectively build trust and confidence across the industries.
When someone's experiencing a life crisis or some moment of vulnerability, we often talk about the fact that their bandwidth is really limited. They have to make so many decisions and there's so many things going on. And for them to be able to engage with the network that should be there to support them, we need to take the complexity out. And the way of doing that is having really aligned and similar approaches to how we're supporting people.
Dealing with customer vulnerability, this is particularly for essential services market like electricity, like gas, like water. Businesses should use that opportunity to come together and work out and learn from each other. One business might trial something and they realise, well, that actually worked. We've actually got greater engagement from people experiencing vulnerability and we're able to provide the assistance at the right time. I think they should be sharing that intel with others so that Victorians, no matter which business that they contract with, are getting supported in that access to essential services.
I've seen the clear journey that the Essential Services Commission is taking in this regard, looking specifically at issues like hardship and payment difficulties, through to now a broader approach to understanding that different people in the community have different vulnerabilities or needs, and that we need to take account of all of those. I really congratulate the Commission for going on that journey and being brave and opening itself up to different ways of working. I think it's a real role model for others, including my own agency. And I really hope that it's the sort of path that we can all continue to go on, really just because that's the core reason we exist as regulators, is to serve our community and the people that live in it.
What I have seen with the ESC and the vulnerability strategy is a great example of it, is taking a much more progressive approach to be much more responsive to what we're seeing in our community and being able to turn things around quickly and pivot to a more progressive approach to regulation. And I see that part of that can be working a little bit more as partners with the industry and being able to get those better outcomes for customers. The leadership that a strategy piece like this provides in setting out some principles and aspirations and a roadmap to get there is going to be really valuable, I think, to bring the industry together and have us all, pitch in for better outcomes and reducing those customers that do experience vulnerability is the long-term aim.
Well, thank you to Chiara, Nicole, Gerard, Cynthia and Sean for taking the time to share your thoughts on the process. A virtual round of applause for these contributors as well, please. As Kate said earlier, this strategy is part of the Commission's journey to better understand vulnerability and how we as a regulator can help address the barriers to accessing essential services. But as our speakers have noted just then, we're not on this journey by ourselves. This is a shared pathway, a journey we're on together. So where to from here? Now the strategy is adopted, we need to move to the hard work, which is implementation. Each of the strategy's objectives comes with a set of actions, and we've mapped those actions to teams and divisions within the Commission. And as we move to implementation of these key actions, we'll also be able to further consider the many specific ideas and recommendations that we received in submissions, in workshops, and from the community panel. From here, we will also develop a measurement framework to promote accountability and a way to track progress against the goals of the strategy. Over the year ahead, we will work with the sectors we oversee to further develop these ideas and ways to measure the impact of this work. So we'll keep you up to date via our website and other key channels we use to communicate with you. Before I hand over to Kate to wrap up this event, I'd like to briefly reflect on the many contributions to this work. Many people here today have helped shape this strategy. It's been the product of months of work from people within and outside the Commission, and I personally would like to thank all of those of you who've taken time to meet with us, to provide your insights and feedback, and to support as this strategy has been developed. I know the results are all the stronger for your input, and it paves the way for an ongoing collaboration. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Kate to wrap up today's event.
Thanks very much, Simon. This strategy absolutely is the result of many hands, something I think you've summed up really well. So Looking back, the work that's gone into reaching this point is absolutely incredible, both inside and outside the Commission. Thank you, Simon. As Lead Commissioner, your passion and enthusiasm has shone through at every stage of the project. Thank you to the team behind this work. And while there have been many in the Commission who have given their time and expertise, I'd just like to take the time to call out just a few. Executive Director Marcus Crudden, thank you, Marcus. Project Manager Customer and Vulnerability Lucy Weston. Project Leads Jess Gregory, Kat George, Pallavi Yagnik, Peter Farquhar and Alex Sirianen. A virtual round of applause for the team, please. Lots of hard work has gone on behind the scenes. And thanks very much to Sue, again, for taking the time to be with us today and share your reflections. Much appreciated. I'm optimistic too. And lastly, thanks to everyone attending today's event. As I said, this is a real milestone for us, one I'm glad we could share with you. You can stay up to date with our progress by following us on social media and signing up to our mailing list. You can also contact the team via the email address in the chat. In closing, Getting to Fair is not just about us. Getting to Fair is about all of us on this shared journey with a common goal to make a real difference for Victorians. To succeed, we need to continue as we started, working with the wider community, consumer advocates, community help services, government, and the businesses we regulate and administer. To see so many of you here today, to be with us, tells me we are on this journey together, which is absolutely amazing and excellent to see. I am really proud of this strategy and the work that's gone into it to get to this point. I'm really looking forward to embarking on this next phase where all the hard work, as Simon, really starts by really working together on getting to fair, breaking down those barriers to essential services. Thanks everyone for being with us today. Take care and stay well.